It's great to be here at the History Symposium. I'm here for the fourth of the 5 symposiums. I was away somewhere far away in 2002 and missed that one. I know some of you were here to hear about the millions of years ago, but that's not what this talk is about. This is an author talk, and we have 7 authors presenting at this symposium who will talk about some of their various books. And I'm a little embarrassed to talk about my books because, well, they're my books. So I'd rather talk about geology or things that other people don't know about, but a lot of people in this room here do use these books as resources on the trails and on the rivers, and hopefully I can share with you some of the interesting things on how these 2 books came about. Grand Canyon is primarily a geologic preserve, and we kind of forget that because there are so many superlatives about Grand Canyon. There's incredible diversity with plants, and the archaeology here, as we have heard today, is fantastic. But really, it's the depth and the length and the color and the texture of the Grand Canyon that initially set it apart. More than anything else, its size. And so even though we oftentimes forget that, this is a geologic park. And by the way, in other countries in the world, they are establishing geology parks with that name. They are national geologic parks. And hopefully one day that can happen here in the United States. John Strong Newberry was the very first geologist to see the Grand Canyon, and he was the first Euro-American to say anything positive about it. And I've been doing a little bit of research about all these Euro-Americans, starting with the Coronado expedition in 1540, and no Euro-American that wrote down their feelings about the Grand Canyon had anything good to say about it. And then this man came along, and he was with Lieutenant Joseph Christmas Ives. Ives can also be credited with saying a few positive things because Newberry was in the saddle right next to him. And these are some of the things that Newberry said about the Grand Canyon. These canyons belong to a vast system of erosion and are wholly due to the exclusive action of water. Being the first geologist, he nonetheless recognized that it was the river that carved the hole in the ground. It was not some geologic fault or rift that had opened up and the river happened to occupy. He actually saw that it was the river that carved the canyon. And that established a whole new sub-branch of geology called fluvialism, in which rivers can be known to cut landscapes. On a trip 2 years later, he said, though valueless to the agriculturalist, dreaded and shunned by the immigrant, the miner, and even the adventurous trapper, the Colorado Plateau is to the geologist a paradise. It has the most splendid exposure of stratified rocks in the world. And Ives next to him said that it was a profitless locality and will doubtless be unvisited by whites. And on the same trip, he wrote this, that it was a paradise. So let me tell you, it was the geologist who first announced to the world that the Grand Canyon was a grand place. And these are 4 of the most famous geologists from the latter part of the 19th century. And not only were they publishing in scientific papers, but John Wesley Powell brought the first photographer down the river. Clarence Dutton brought the first artist to the Grand Canyon. And that's how this canyon came to be known. Dutton was here in the early 1880s, and by 1888, Grand Canyon had its first tourists on the South Rim. And it was all a function of geologists announcing to people that it was a worthwhile place, and then bringing these artists along who could convey it to everyone else. That was in spite of this man right here, who we've heard a little bit about today. Ralph Cameron had a different vision for Grand Canyon. His vision for Grand Canyon was that it would be an entrepreneurial park where businessmen could come in and establish soda shops and ice cream things, much like that had happened at Niagara Falls by the 1850s. And fortunately, Ralph Cameron's view of Grand Canyon did not prevail. But look at the determination in his eyes. He actually became a U.S. Senator with the sole task of keeping Grand Canyon from being a national park. But fortunately, just 100 years from next Tuesday, President Woodrow Wilson signed the law to make Grand Canyon a national park. And you can go online and see the 4-page document that establishes Grand Canyon. 3.5 pages just mention the coordinates for what the boundaries of the park are going to be. and then a paragraph that Ralph Cameron wanted in there that there should be no law to say that you couldn't keep your toll road in Grand Canyon National Park. So anyway, that's just a reminder of why we're here this week. My relationship with Grand Canyon began in 1973 when I was on a hitchhiking trip around the West, and me and my friends were interested in visiting national parks, and I first saw the Grand Canyon from the North Rim. And I was taken by it. We were up there 1973, and it was July, and a beautiful sunny day, and this huge thunderstorm moved through the canyon. And I remember looking down at the lightning, and after 20 minutes, it had moved on just as fast as it came in, and all the rocks in the canyon were glistening. And I don't think it was the beer from the saloon that made it glisten. It actually was just a magical sight. And within 2 years, I had arranged for a position to be a volunteer ranger down at Phantom Ranch. So I arrived in October of 1975, and I have some of these scratchy old photographs that friends would send to me because I didn't take pictures in those days. But there's the old River Ranger Station. Now, they say to always have a little bit of humor in your talks, and it's hard to be humorous about telling you a story of writing a book. So I just thought I would share with you what I looked like in those days, and I'm sure that'll provide a few laughs. This is me in 1976 as a volunteer ranger, and there I am in 1977 with the pork chops going. My good friend Brian Brown encouraged me to produce this photograph of when I was a ranger down at Meadview, and this was shortly after Grand Canyon National Park was enlarged, and Grand Canyon decided to send 2 of their rangers down to Meadview to be rangers down there. And this is taken at Emery Falls near the very end of the Grand Canyon. Anyway, this began my relationship with Grand Canyon, and because of that, my paternal grandfather, Lester Ranney, he took a great interest in me. And here he is, about 20 years old. And there's another picture of him. And the reason he took an interest is that in 1919, when Grand Canyon became a national park, he hiked down the Bright Angel Trail in one day, and when I got that job at Phantom Ranch, he recognized that I was sort of a special grandchild out of the 20 that he ended up having. And he wasn't too good with kids, but when he found out that I was living at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, he remembered that hike that he did. Now that would have been Ralph Cameron's trail. That was the old trail. And my grandfather either didn't have the money or he didn't want to pay the $1 toll to go down, so he walked down, and if you were on foot, you could go for free. So he took an interest, and what I did is I sent him the topographic map of the park that was there, and this is in May of 1976. When I would come home, he would buy a 6-pack of Anchor Steam beer, and we would sit down in his living room, and I would just tell him stories of what it was like at the bottom. So we established a very special relationship, and I had sent him a copy of the map, and the map was hanging in the River Ranger Station. So here is the 1962 topographic map of the Grand Canyon, and he had a copy of this, and anytime I would write him a letter, he would be able to look on the map and see where I was exploring, and he just loved it. It gave him something to look forward to. By this time, he was on oxygen, and he was basically sitting in a chair the whole time. But it gave him a little bit of excitement in his life. He was a lifelong hunter and fisherman, but at the end of his life, he couldn't get around too well. Well, this topographic map hung on the river station there, but in the early 1976, the geologic map of the Grand Canyon was first published. And this was the base map for that geologic map. And very soon at the River Ranger Station, that map was covered over with the geologic map. And the geologic map, many of you are familiar with it. It's very colorful. This would have been in the mid-1970s, which was a psychedelic era in the United States. And people who didn't know the first thing about geology would hang this map on their wall. Anybody here from the 70s who hung this map on the wall at some time? We know who you are, and the park rangers are waiting outside to check your car. Well, it was called the Dragon Map because the shape that the river made, cutting through those variously colored layers, reminded some people of a dragon. And this was the start of my idea to write a book about how the Grand Canyon formed. And I hung this on the wall of various bedrooms for over 30 years. I was a bachelor for most of that time, so I wasn't getting information about taking things down that were like this. And I estimate there was 11,000 nights that I fell asleep looking at this map. And I would just look for patterns in the map. I would look for possibly ways that the river had become integrated, maybe with the little Colorado River up here. I think there's something big going on there. Other people think that here at Kanab Creek, where it comes in, there might be something geologic going on there. But for almost 11,000 nights, this was the last thing I would see at night. And it probably even forced geology into my brain doing that. And so I was a trail guide at this time, and I was learning a lot about geology. I was attracted to the geology stories. And I've done literally dozens and dozens of hikes with people in there, and I was always sharing these geologic stories with them. And so I got a lot of encouragement to do that, and I decided to be brave enough. In 1997, while I was in mid-career as a trail guide, I decided that I would make a proposal to write a book about how the Grand Canyon formed. And I was told that the Grand Canyon Natural History Association would be the perfect publisher for something like that. So I submitted a proposal out of the blue. And I actually have a copy of the rejection letter that I got. This was the only thing that I had published before. It was sort of a local press named Red Lake Press that had published this book, and they printed 2,500 copies. It was out of print. That was my only experience with writing to that point. But when I sent in my proposal to the Grand Canyon Association, I got this letter back. It was just 2 paragraphs, and I'll just zoom in there so that you can see it. I regret that we are unable to pursue your proposal. So I realized that the time for this book was not quite ready, and nobody else was talking about how the Grand Canyon formed, and I don't think that people were really ready for this story. When I found this old document in my files there, I noticed that I had a sticky note on the top of the letter. And that sticky note, let me just zoom in there for you. Greer Price was the managing editor at the Grand Canyon Association. This sticky note, I don't know who said this, but it said, "The singular theory of Eva Lukita's book is looked upon favorably, and also the market. Who wants this book?" And I remember distinctly that somebody at the Grand Canyon Association told me that this was not a good idea. So I packed up my bags and I went home. But the idea never really went away. And this was Eva Lukita's singular theory. It's down here at the mouth of the Grand Canyon. I know some of you have been there, but this is where the Colorado River spectacularly exits the Grand Wash Cliffs. And admittedly, this photograph was taken in the 1980s when Lake Mead was full of water. There's Pierce Ferry right there. But all of these gravels in the foreground here, they sit right at the mouth of the Grand Canyon, and they should have had debris from the Grand Canyon if the Colorado River was there. Well, it found out that there was no Colorado River gravel in here. Eva Lukita spent many years mapping these gravels, and there were no Colorado River gravels in there. And the youngest that deposit is 6 million years. That means that according to his theory, the river was not in place prior to 6 million years ago. And Eva Lukita was considered the dean of Grand Canyon geologists, and I admired him greatly. But after that rejection, I just kept taking people down into the Grand Canyon and enjoying myself and telling geofiction to anybody that would listen. And then something very spectacular happened in the year 2000. For only the second time ever, geologists decided to get together and have a conference and talk about what they knew about the evolution of the river and what they should be asking. And there were 70 geologists that attended this at the community building here, and I was one of those 70 geologists, and this reignited the fire inside of me. And what you're looking at here is the cover of a monograph that the Grand Canyon Association later published with all of the results of this particular meeting. And it seemed like the energy now for understanding how the Grand Canyon formed was becoming more and more desirable for people to know about. So before a publisher was found in October of 2001, I actually started writing some of Carving Grand Canyon. Even though I didn't have a name yet, I just started writing down some ideas that I had. And finally, by the year 2003, the Grand Canyon Association began to solicit proposals for it. Now, while I was doing hikes in the canyon, I kept seeing things in the geologic landscape that intrigued me. And I'll show you this right here. This is on the Hermit Trail. And if you look at the upper two layers here, you can see the Toroweep and the Kaibab just form this very mature slope. And then they do the same thing back here in the Dripping Springs side canyon. But you'll notice that there's a couple of things happening there, and there's some erosion that is happening. I'm going to need some batteries from anybody that's in the back there that knows where the batteries are. These two things right here, these are places where headward erosion is eating its way back into this very mature slope right here. And this is a place where the Grand Canyon is currently getting longer and wider as Hermit Creek eats its way back in there. So in January 2003, the Grand Canyon Association actually let out a proposal to have a book that could be sold in the stores here and to the general public exactly for the idea that had been turned down in 1997. And I think it was the conference in the year 2000 that eventually made the then deputy director of the association, Pam Frazier, realize that there was no way that the general public could learn about how the Grand Canyon formed. Next slide, please. And so only 2 geologists were asked to submit proposals. Can you go back one? And it was myself and Dr. Eva Lukita. And I thought, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to get my proposal accepted for somebody like this? Next, please. So Dr. Lukita was a well-respected geologist from Flagstaff. He had done the work at the Grand Wash Cliffs, and he had written this book for the Museum of Northern Arizona in 1988, Canyon Maker. And that little sticky note that I had on the rejection letter about Evo's singular theory, that was all encompassed in this right here. And if you came to the Grand Canyon in the 1980s or the 1990s, it was mostly Eva Lukita's idea that you would hear about for the formation of the Grand Canyon. Other geologists thought that the canyon could be as old as 70 million years. Next slide, please. But so I submitted my proposal, and the one thing that I did in my proposal that maybe put me over the top for this book was that I suggested that no matter whose proposal was accepted, that they treat all of the theories on how the Grand Canyon formed fairly. And I just felt that that was the right thing to do. I could never write a book in which I would only favor one of the theories, because I was under the belief that any geologist who had ever done professional work in the canyon and had recognized something in the rocks couldn't be entirely wrong. There were no slouches of geologists that were working in the canyon. Everybody was a PhD geologist, and they were seeing things in the rock. And you might say to yourself, how can it be that the geologists who say the canyon is old could be right, and how could the geologist who said it was young could be right? But as we're starting to learn, various portions of the canyon formed at various times, and it turns out that yes, indeed, they were both right. Next slide, please. And so on January 23rd, can you go back one, please? On January 23rd, 2003, can you go ahead one? I received a phone call from Pam Frazier saying that my proposal had been accepted, and I was very happy about that. I was already writing the book at the time, but now it was time to get down and actually design the book. Next slide, please. The hardest thing that I had to do was figuring out a title for the book, and I had my own favorite idea, and this is my favorite one next: Emerging Ideas on the Origin of the Grand Canyon. Now, to me, that said it all, and I thought it was a little bit poetic, and maybe it even danced a little bit on the cover. There was virtually no one I spoke to who liked that title, and I think it was unanimous. Everybody said, no, that's too long, don't do that. How old is the Grand Canyon was another one that we did, and I'm just going to go through the whole list here. Next slide, please. Through time in Grand Canyon, the Grand Canyon, how it came to be, These things would be funny if they weren't so awful. Man's journey with the Colorado River, evolution of the Colorado River and Grand Canyon, the geologist's Grand Canyon. Now, mind you, I had years to try to figure out what to call this book, and I just couldn't do it. And even the title of this lecture is kind of lame if you ask me. But so one day we were hiking on the Bright Angel Trail after doing a rim-to-rim hike, and on all of my hikes, I would just tell people about my idea, and I would say, I just can't figure out a title for the book. And we were near the Mile and a Half house. This is in the white switchbacks there in the Coconino. And this woman just said casually, she just said, what about carving Grand Canyon? Next slide, please. What about carving Grand Canyon? It was almost instantaneous. I said, that's it. That's going to work. And of course, everybody did like the title, and we went on from there. I said to myself, why didn't I think of that? I don't know why I didn't think of it. So we finally published the book in April of 2005. Many of you that have been around here a long time will remember this cover photographed by Larry Lindahl. It was kind of interesting. Larry, unfortunately, was going through a divorce just as the design process came up, and he was in a funk, and he was in no position to design a book. I actually called him up since he was a friend who I had hiked with before, and I said, I'll come over and I'll tell you where to place the photographs within the text. And we spent many 8 and 14-hour days in December and January 2004, 2005 putting these in the book. That was actually him that decided on the subtitle, Evidence, Theories, and Mystery. He just thought it needed to have something below carving Grand Canyon. So these are some of the awards that the first edition got. This one here in 2006, we got honorable mention, second place in the category of nature and environment, and some guy named David Attenborough got the first prize in that one that year. Next, please. And then a second edition was, I forgot to change the date there. That second edition was published in 2012, and this is the current cover of the book right here, and that's a photograph by Mike Buchheit, and I'm very happy to say that there are a few awards for that particular edition as well. Next, please. So this is just a timeline. Influences from the Dragon Map, the first proposal in 1997, wrote the chapters in 2001, and these are the sales to date, both the first and second editions, 43,000. And they actually have it in an ebook now, but in 4 years, they've only sold 307 of those. So this is probably not a book for millennials, I'm guessing from that figure right there. I don't know, Lulu Santa Maria is here, and she's in charge of publications at the Grand Canyon Conservancy, and she does a great job for them. Now, I have to tell you, I do get royalties from the book, and here I am at an El Tovar signing in 2005, just after it came out. And I do receive some royalties, but the biggest royalty I've ever gotten was when I was on a trip in the middle of the Indian Ocean on a little island called La Réunion. And if you look at where this is off the coast of Madagascar, between Madagascar and Australia over here. This is the antipode of northern Arizona. And so I was on the opposite side of the world on this wonderful island. It's a volcanic island that's still active, and it has these huge canyons cut into it. I was just gaga over this landscape. And we were staying at one of the beach resorts, and it's very beautiful there. Just about this time of the day, this is an actual photograph from the night, I checked my email in the open-air internet cafe they had at the hotel, and this email came from Helen Thompson, said, I have been hired by the Grand Canyon Association to help promote your book. And like an international traveler, I started flirting with her immediately, and I said, run outside, because it was sunrise in northern Arizona. I said, can you see Venus? And I asked her to go out if she could see Venus, because I was watching Venus just going down the horizon, and I wondered if she could see it. But that led to our relationship, and carving Grand Canyon is what brought us together. This is actually a picture from our first date on the Hermit Trail, and that was in 2005. So that's the biggest royalty I have ever gotten from this book. Well, I just want to say a few things about Ancient Landscape, because this book came along 3 years later, and it is actually an outgrowth of Carving Grand Canyon. And the reason for that is that after we had that successful launch of Carving Grand Canyon, Pam Frazier came to me and she said, if you know of any other geologists who want to publish geology books about the Grand Canyon, please send them my way. So I was doing these book signings and I went to these professional conferences, and at a professional conference in 2005, I ran into one of my old professors from NAU, Dr. Ron Blakey. You can always tell it's a geology convention because they're drinking beer. And Dr. Blakey, since 1990, had been making these paleogeographic maps of the American Southwest. And they were becoming the rage all over the world because they were so realistic. And when I would see Ron at these professional conferences, I was teaching at Yavapai College at the time, and I knew he was going to put his maps in a book. And I'd always go up to him and I'd say, Ron, is the book ready yet? And Ron stands 6'6", and he's a big guy, and he's a big kid. And he would, I'd say, Ron, where's the book? And he'd shuffle his feet, and he'd go, oh, God. Wayne, don't even ask. That's what he would say, don't even ask. And it happened 2 or 3 times, and he always had some kind of a publishing detour. And this was in 2005 in Salt Lake City at the Geological Society of America. And I said, Ron, I might be able to help you because I just found a publisher who wants to do more geology books. And so Ron was making his maps at his computer at NAU, and you can see one of these maps here. And I couldn't resist putting a little bit of geology in the talk, even though this is an author talk. But I've just got the paleogeographic maps by Ron for the layers of the Grand Canyon. So there's the Tapete sandstone at 505. That light white color is actually shallow marine water. The red dot is the Shrine of the Ages. This next map is the Red Wall limestone. There's the 4 corners right there in Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. And just for all of the Grand Canyon layers, you can see this paleogeography that Ron created using 2 computer applications, GeoMap app and Photoshop, to make these realistic views here. This light-colored orange that you see right there, those represent ancient sand dunes, and they actually are space photographs of dunes from the Sahara Desert. And there's the Kaibab limestone. You can see all of this shallow marine water. We're all standing on the limestone right now of this particular deposit from 270 million years ago. So Pam Frazier said, yes, we want this book. And that was the birth of Ancient Landscapes of the Colorado Plateau. And at that time, the art director at the Grand Canyon Association was Ron Short. And much like the design of the previous book, we wanted to get it out in a hurry because Lehman Brothers was going to go broke, and we needed to get this book launched before then. That's actually a true story. Lehman Brothers went broke on September 15th, and the book was put out on October 1st. And it's a $35 book, and so we were worried that it wouldn't sell, but it has sold quite well because these maps are really changing for the way you can understand geology. And there's Ron and I at our book signing in October of 2008 at the Geological Society meeting in Houston, Texas. And that was a wonderful event. And we've sold 13,000 of those buggers there, and Lulu has agreed that maybe a second edition that'll be newly redesigned will be out very soon, and we're going to have a whole new layout for the book as we bring it forward. So that's just a quick look at Ron and I working on this. It was such a pleasure to work with an ex-professor of mine at NAU, and we're still friends, and we visit him in Carlsbad, California. And he is still making maps, and I've put his website up there, Deep Time Maps. And if you're just curious about all of these, he's got Europe, he's got Australia, he's got North America. It's a really wonderful website to peruse, and he'll sell you a CD with all of the maps too if you want. So that's what I have to talk to you about today, and thank you so much for waiting till the very end of the day here. Thank you. I do want to remind you that tonight, John Ross is going to be giving the keynote presentation for this event. So if you want to go out and get dinner and come back, please remember that. Yes, Glenn. That's right. That's where that hiccup happened. And it probably didn't come across. But if you're going down the Hermit Trail and you look across to the west, you can see a very mature landscape that has a smooth slope to it, and that was both on the left-hand side of the slide and the right-hand side. And there's two little deeply cut notches that interrupt that smooth surface that used to go all the way around Dripping Springs Canyon. And what is happening is that as the Colorado River deepens the canyon, the side streams want to lengthen their channels, and that's what those two little fingers are doing into the rim of the Grand Canyon right there. So that slope has become over-steepened, and when you're hiking to Dripping Springs, those are the places where the trail gets just a tiny bit gnarly as you make your way around those two headwardly eroding notches that are in the cliff there. That has not been published. That's total geofiction on my part. But if you look at it the next time, I think you'll see it yourself. Anything else? Yes? That's right. Oh, that reminds me about another thing. This is not the only symposium that's going to be happening here for the Centennial events. April 20th to 22nd, there's a geologic symposium that's free and open to the public. And on the first day, it's going to be all of the researchers who are doing work in the Grand Canyon, and they're going to take us from the Vishnu schist to the lower Colorado River forming just 3 million years ago. And then the second day is going to be educators in geology, such as myself and a lot of other people, and we're going to talk about how to share geology with the public. And the third day is field trips. And so that's going to be the Grand Canyon Geoscience Symposium, April 20th to 22nd. And then in 2020, there's going to be another professional conference. It'll be the fourth one about the origin of the Colorado River and the Grand Canyon. So when that conference is finished, I'm going to take any new ideas, and we are going to add another signature to carving Grand Canyon, if necessary. We might have to throw out some old theories at that point. But there's a lot of interesting things that are happening in the geologic world of Grand Canyon. And if you're free in the last half of April, come back for the Geoscience Symposium. Thank you for that reminder, Lulu. Yes?
We have your book and love it, Carving the Grand Canyon.
Thank you.
My husband's read it. I haven't made it all the way through. Could you summarize for us?
Yes, I can summarize it, but if you ask that man in the gray sweater right behind you to summarize it, you'll get a much funnier story, and it'll probably make more sense. Very quickly, what I tell people is that the river is responsible for the canyon. The river didn't carve the canyon. The river is responsible for it because the width of the river is only about 300 feet, and it's carving down through the layers, but the width of the canyon is all of the side canyons coming in. And think about it, most of those side canyons are dry most of the time, and yet the side canyons come in at the same level as the Colorado River. So that means that it's not really the water that's doing it, but when you get a big flood and the boulders are rolling, that's what carves canyons. And those side canyons are much steeper and they can roll bigger boulders. And if you look at a profile of the side canyons from the rim to the river, they're very steep at the top and they flatten out just before they approach the river. And it's almost like the side canyons are screaming at the Colorado, go faster, because the side canyons, in essence, have more power. But the Colorado River is an old lazy river that's done most of its work. How's that for 190 pages in 2 minutes? Thank you, everybody, and see you tonight and see you tomorrow.